So this is the second of a two-part response to Kristi Winters in a hangout that she had recently, which was a critique, apparently an academic level critique of a video that I'd made on rape culture and whether Western societies are reasonably described as rape cultures. Now, what I would suggest is, as I always do, it would be fantastic if you would go and watch the source material first, and I will of course give you a link to a video. I will be showing clips of a video throughout this video, and there'll always be a time code there, and on each occasion I welcome you to go and check out the original at that time point so that you can put it in some kind of context, perhaps see just what was said just before that, just what was said after that, just to make sure that I'm not quoting anything out of context there. Now, let me remind you, if you didn't watch part one of what the situation was, I'd made this video and then Kristi got in touch with me and told me that she was going to make this very intense review. She spent weeks prepping for this. She was going to consult with experts. She was going to have experts on the show. She told me in a private message, and she also told her patrons in a hangout, which she then put on her channel, which again I'll link to, and I showed in part one, that it would be, she was going to do it as if she was going through a peer review process, so that was the level. And then actually in the footnotes of the hangout itself, she says that she's going to use an academic assessment, that's what this is going to entail. And then she made a comment on Demotivator Opinions in the comments section after the hangout with regard to me, where she suggested that the hangout that had taken place is the first time that my videos had had a proper critique. So even after she'd had the hangout, she regarded it as a proper critique. So I'm going to do a couple of things. I want to address the criticisms in a video as she brings them up and make some comments on that. But what I would also like you, the viewers, to take part in this, and rather than me to assess her hangout, I think it's legitimate to assess her hangout and to assess whether it meets an academic standard as a piece of assessment. Right. So these are the questions that I would like you to consider. Did the hangout accurately represent my video? Did the hangout accurately represent my argument? Were the criticisms made in the hangout valid? Were the criticisms made in the hangout evidenced? And then finally, the fifth one, and this is specifically for anybody who is an academic themselves, were you to assess and validate the process that took place in the hangout? Would you regard it as meeting the standards expected in academia? In other words, were you to be assessing the assessor, would you regard this as a good process that had taken place there? Would you be happy with that assessment process that had taken place there? Now, what I want to do is, before I start looking at actual chunks that took place in the video, I have four major concerns that constitute either the hangout in general or things that just kept cropping up again and again throughout the hangout. So before I start addressing the specific criticisms that were leveled at me, what I want to do is just to give these four objections that I have to the hangout. So my first objection is that there was not a single link or reference to my video, right? Most people, even people that do the bare minimum, would have put a link to the video in the footnotes. She never said at any point I'd encourage people to go and watch the original. If you're watching the hangout live, maybe you'll have to do it after the event, but please go and look at the original to check that we're not taking anything out of context. And bear in mind, it's not as if my video came out and then bang, 3 days later she has this hangout. This is about 6 or 7 weeks after my video came out. So even for viewers that had watched my video, right, their memory of what I'd actually said is going to be pretty vague by the time it gets to Kristi Winters' video. And whereas she'd said in her Patreon hangout, I'm not going to paraphrase him, I'm not going to put words in his mouth, I aim to show clips of what he has to say so he can put it himself and then we'll respond to it.
Go over it and explain what positions he takes up and try to maybe work in the video too, so it's not just me trying to paraphrase him, but actually going with his own video.
Bollocks did she do any of that. There was not a single clip of me talking throughout any of that. So she didn't show me on screen. she presented my argument, right, and she could not even be asked to give a link, let alone encourage people to go and watch the original. For me, that falls well short of the standard that I would expect of any YouTube response video, let alone one that claims to be working to some kind of academic standard. So that was the first problem. The second one fits in with that, which was that she didn't give my argument a fair introduction. Now, the fairest introduction she could have given is the kind of thing that I try and do, which is to show a clip. Allow the person to give the argument themselves. That's got to be the best way that you can do it. Of course, you can still judiciously slice it up and quote mine a bit there. But if you can show that clip, perhaps with the time coding as well, so people know where in the original to find it, surely that is the gold standard that you can do. Maybe she thought it was too long. Maybe she thought that showing 4 or 5 minutes of me was just going to be too long and boring in a hangout that lasted 1 hour and 40 fucking minutes, right? So maybe that's why she didn't do it. But in lieu of doing that, what she did is she did it in her own words. In fact, this is her introducing her doing just that.
To summarize what Noel presented in his video, and it's a 40-minute long video, but it kind of has general sort of areas, and I've tried to summarize what those are.
Now, I propose that what Kristi had to do there, if she's not going to attain the gold standard of letting me present the argument for myself, is that she has to adopt this principle of fucking charity that she's always rattling on about.
And the thing that I try to approach, especially when I'm doing an academic piece of work, is this principle of charity, which comes from philosophy.
And present my argument in the strongest possible form. And part of presenting my argument in the strongest possible form is A, not misportraying it, which we'll come to in a minute, but 2, not conflating my argument with her objections. Her objections needed to wait till later. This was the segment of the video where what she needed to do was just to outline my argument and do no more than outline my argument. But if you watch from 8 minutes 58 onwards, where she goes through all of this, and I'll be showing you some of these bits, every time she introduces something that I'd said, she says, oh, but that was a load of rubbish, or that was irrelevant. Noel then said this, oh, but that was wrong because of this, that, or the other. That was not the right time to make those objections. This was the point. Given that you weren't giving me a chance to present my argument, given that you weren't linking to the video or anything to do with it, this was the chance where all you should have been doing, I propose, is simply outlining what I had to say in the best and most reasonable and honest way that you possibly could have done. But you totally ignored doing that and instead conflated it with the criticisms that you had. The third problem that I had was that constantly throughout the entire video, all three of them misportrayed my video as critiquing and denying rape culture in the West. Sometimes absolutely flat out they misportrayed it in those terms. But listen to what I had to say right at the beginning of my video. So let me make it quite clear that in this video I will not be disputing that there is something we can discuss called rape culture. I will not be disputing that such a thing as rape culture can exist within our societies and perhaps does exist within our societies. The question that I'm going to be critiquing is this suggestion that our society is a rape culture, that our society is rape cultured. And you hear this in phrases, and you might want to Google some of these phrases, such as we live in a rape culture, or due to our rape culture, or America is a rape culture. So that is what I'm going to be trying to delve into and investigate. Are societies such as the United States of America and the United Kingdom reasonably defined as rape cultures? So I think I was pretty clear there. I'm not disputing that rape culture is a valid concept that you could explore. I'm not disputing the existence of rape culture or that rape culture exists in Western societies. What I'm disputing is that Western societies, most explicitly the United Kingdom, the United States, are well described as rape cultures or as rape cultured. I gave the little bit on screen which you may have seen there with regard to drugs culture. I wouldn't describe, if you take alcohol to one side, the United Kingdom as drugs culture. The United Kingdom is a drugs culture. But I'd have to be an absolute fucking insane moron to say there is no drugs culture in the United Kingdom. So if you cannot differentiate, if you're trying to assess my video and you cannot differentiate between those two things, then we're going to have real problems right from the get-go. Now, what is really interesting is that Kristi Winters, straight after that last clip that I displayed, actually acknowledges that I said what I just said there. So let me play you a little clip of Kristi.
He starts off with a disclaimer saying that he wants to make it clear that he won't be disputing that there is something that can be discussed called rape culture, and that he won't be disputing that such a thing as rape culture can exist within a society, or perhaps does exist in some societies. Then he talks about, he says he's going to be critiquing the suggestion that our society is a rape culture, that our society is rape cultured.
So she said that, and she'd acknowledged that I'd said that, but then it was like I'd somehow got caught up in the kind of many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, and I'd been drifting down one of the alternative universes where she says that, but then shifted across to one where she never said that, because from that point onwards in the video, they utterly ignored all of that and just proceeded as if I was critiquing the concept of rape culture or denying that rape culture exists in the West. Now, this isn't the point in the video yet. I'm not at the point in the video yet where I'm going to start playing you all the snippets and responding to them. But just let me... What I would advise you to do is to read the exchange that I had with Kristi after the hangout in Demotivator Opinions mirror of the video. He mirrored it because, along with Foxy Jezebel, he was the experts that she'd promised me, right? I was expecting, she'd mentioned experts before, and I thought it was going to be some of her mates from academia. I was expecting, well, I don't know. I don't want to say anything nasty about Foxy Jezebel or Demotivator Opinion, but I was a little bit underwhelmed by what she'd regarded as experts. But read the full load of comments. I'll give you a link to his mirror. Have a read of the comment exchange, but have a particular look at this. So this is a couple of days after the hangout. If you had actually used the definitions correctly and used appropriate data, you would have concluded that rape culture exists in the West. The fact that you are denying what exists is denying rape culture exists. You know, I don't know what else to say other than because that wasn't what my video was about. And it doesn't matter how many times I explain that it wasn't about whether or not rape culture exists. It's about whether our whole societies are best described as rape cultures. It doesn't matter. It's like a default point that she just keeps getting drawn back to there. So that's really, really frustrating. That's the third of my problems. The fourth of my problems... This video was billed again and again to her patrons, to me, to the comment that she'd left in the exchange that we'd had alongside with David Landon Cole, that this was all about my video. This was the academic style assessment of my video, right? Now, what I would expect from something like that is that it would be highly focused on my video, that what is being discussed would either be contained within my video or very, very relevant to my video. And yet it was conflated with all kinds of shit. Throughout the video, people, and probably Tim, Demotivator Opinion, was the worst of this, would say things like, well, this is just typical of the kind of tactics these people use, or the kind of things that these people say. Right, and would talk about things that I'd never said in the video, that in many cases I've never said in any video, and in some cases would never say in a million years, and might find as objectionable as anybody that took part in that hangout. And yet this was supposed to be an academic level assessment of my video, and yet all these different things were conflated. Anything that anybody had ever said against feminism or against rape culture, against any of those things, was dragged into this video. And I thought that was a really, really unwarranted thing to do. That was not the time or the place to have those. And what was really, really objectionable, because hangouts can deviate, at no point in that hangout did anybody say, by the way, we're discussing these things, but we're not claiming that these are Noel's perspectives or these relate to Noel's video. And Noel maybe wouldn't agree with any of these things. Bollocks to that. They just chucked it all in there. And you know what they say, you know, mud sticks, doesn't it? And that's the problem. All this fucking mud of anything that anybody's ever said against them, all of that was fair game to include. None of that should have been included in this. Okay, so that concludes the objections that I have there. What I want to do now is I've got to answer the criticisms that she's made, of course. So let's start to go through the criticisms that she makes in this chunk at the beginning, where she shouldn't have even been making a criticisms, and then I'll pick out a few other bits from the Hangout that are representative, I think, of some of the content of the Hangout, or at least some of the bits, because only about 20% of this hour and 40-minute long Hangout actually seem to pertain to me in any way, shape or form. Okay, so let's get on with it. Let me show you a bit of Kristi.
He then goes around about giving some definitions for rape culture, which he quotes, I think, for the Wikipedia one.
You just think the Wikipedia one, Kristi? You know, you didn't bother going to check because, of course, you wouldn't be familiar with the Wikipedia definition, would you, Kristi? Because, of course, you get your definition from Shana Olfman.
Which is a setting in which rape is pervasive and normalized due to societal attitudes about gender, sexuality, about gender and sexuality. Now that's a key definition because it includes the idea of societal attitudes about gender and sexuality. And the problem later on is that Noel tries to equate attitudes toward rape and rapists with this element of the definition, which really doesn't fit.
I actually think you make the mistake here, Kristi, because you start to make it about the attitudes towards sexuality and gender. And I actually think, you know, the Olfman definition that you go with, Kristi, I think that's a better one because that's not just sexuality and gender, it's sex, sexuality and gender. And what you end up doing, it's not about those attitudes, it's about the normalization. And what you end up doing is affirming the consequent. You need to demonstrate the normalization, not what the normalization may have been caused by. Because yes, it may be that if you have that normalization, therefore there are these attitudes towards sex, sexuality and gender. But you can't say these attitudes to sex, sexuality and gender, therefore normalization. That is you love your logical fallacies, that is a deductive logical fallacy that you've made there. So I don't actually think that I made the mistake there. I think that you're misunderstanding the definition actually and not me.
So there's no misunderstanding right off the bat that normalization deals with the social processes through which ideas and actions come to be seen as normal and taken for granted or natural in everyday life. And this again will be problematic when he tries to tie things back to rape statistics, because what he doesn't deal with when he talks about crime statistics is the social processes through which ideas and actions come to be seen as normal and taken for granted. He then moves on to discuss, I have my note here, need to consider pervasive and normalize, and he tries to say that it's about having abnormally high rates of rape in a culture. But that's not what the definition deals with.
Okay, so she effectively makes the same point twice there as she conflates her responses with her apparently outlining my argument, which is what she was fucking supposed to be doing at the time. And she says that I'm wrong. The approach that I taken is looking at that definition and saying there's clearly two parts to this definition. There's two ways in which the definition works. One is in terms of the incidence of rape and the amount of rapes and sexual assaults that are taking place. That is one way in which we regard rape culture as existing or otherwise. And the other is in terms of normalization of attitude. And she's saying that's a load of bunk. Even after the Hangout, as part of going back to demotivator opinions, the exchange we had there. This is what she said in his summary of Noel's errors. Number 2, he misoperationalized the concept to be about rape statistics, not culture or social processes around sexuality or gender. So I read this, right, and I was just making a few screen grabs as I did this just to get a bit of the groundwork done for this response. And I thought, okay, so did I misoperationalize the concept to be about rape statistics? So I thought, well, I tell you what, let's go back and have a look at the Wikipedia page, okay, for rape culture, because it's their definition that I'm using. And you know, one thing, when you view Wikipedia pages on a phone, right, it sometimes gives you a little bit of a different, it puts a little different bit of a different aspect on it because it portrays things in a slightly different format. So I'm reading the definition there in feminist theory. Rape culture is a setting in which rape is pervasive and normalized. Right, I'm reading that, and then suddenly my eye is drawn. What is the first picture that the contributors and editors of Wikipedia have used and their page on rape culture? And it is rape rates per 100,000 of the population around the globe. So let me get this right, because I just think this is a chance for me to learn from a social scientist who is an expert in these things, as Kristi claims. Okay, but perhaps it's also a chance for the contributors and editors to Wikipedia to learn from a social scientist who is she is the expert in these things, because clearly they don't understand their own fucking definition, because they seem to think their definition in some way pertains to incidences of rape and sexual assault as well as normalization of attitudes towards these things. So they've come up with a definition and they don't even understand their own fucking definition, Kristi. Wow, that's amazing. And you know what? If you scroll down that Wikipedia page and read about how rape culture was originally used, you will read words like rape is common. The idea that rape is common were the ideas that they were trying to get across with rape culture. So obviously the early adopters of the term, the people who formulated the term, they didn't even know what they were talking about either. Thank fuck we've got Kristi Winters there to put us straight on that one.
When he moves on to next is his use of definitions in science, and he makes up his own definition of rape culture instead of critiquing the concept as used, which is what he said he was going to do in the first part of his video.
First, note what Kristi has done, which he said, in the first part of his video, he said that he was going to critique rape culture. I just played you the clip a couple of minutes ago, so you know that's bollocks. I said the exact opposite. I said the thing that I'm not going to do is to critique the concept of rape culture, or to deny the idea that rape culture exists in our societies. What I'm going to do instead is to look at whether our societies are best described as rape cultures. You heard me say it, and you also heard Kristi admit that I said it, and now we're only about 2 minutes later on. She's already waffled on to this total fantasy about what I'd said. That's the one thing. The other thing is she said that I changed the definition. No, what I've done is I've took a definition that does not in any way give you any clues as to how you would apply that to societies and say, that society is a rape culture, that society is not a rape culture, and say, well, what criteria could we use? Let me give you an analogy, because I had a bit of an exchange, which I'll show you in the Demotivator Opinion thing, to do with crime culture, right, with Kristi. So I'll just show you that while I'm talking. Right, let's talk about crime culture. Crime culture is a culture where there is a high level of crime and a permissiveness and acceptance that crime is acceptable. That is a crime culture. Would you describe, does that exist within the United Kingdom? By fucking rights it does. And I come across it a lot more in my normal day-to-day working life than Kristi does, I would suggest. Right? But would you, on the basis of accepting that crime culture exists in the UK, say the United Kingdom has a crime culture, the United Kingdom is crime cultured? Well, no, you'd want to compare it to other nations, wouldn't you, and say, well, which has the greatest level of crime culture? Or what is the level of crime culture in modern extant societies, contemporary societies, and what was it 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago? Steven Pinker, he's obviously another stupid fucking idiot who knows nothing about social science, the same as me, Kristi. He made this point himself recently, which is that we talk about modern societies as if they've got really high levels of crime, as if they're crime cultures, and it's bullshit. That by the data that he's seen, the analysis that he's done, in all likelihood, the levels of crime that we have in societies today is lower per capita than at any time in the entire human history. Right, so these are the things you've got to take into account. I didn't disregard the Wikipedia definition. I used the elements of the Wikipedia definition of pervasiveness and normalization of attitude and said, how would you apply that to societies to differentiate which societies are best described as rape cultures and which are not? That is not the same as throwing the definition out or changing the definition.
So he says, I'm going to work with regard to rape culture, taking the Wikipedia definition, applying it to a whole culture, that a society could be considered rape culture if it can temporarily or historically features either an unusually high incidence of rape and sexual assaults or permissive and apathetic attitude toward raping, rapists, and dismissive attitudes toward rape victims. That's not what the definition is for a reason, and there are problems with defining it that way.
Oh, absolutely. The definition isn't that for a reason, because that isn't the job of the definition of rape culture, right? Just the same as the definition of crime culture does not include how you would apply that to different countries to analyse which ones would be best described as crime cultured. Just the same as the definition of gun culture doesn't tell you what criteria you should apply to countries to describe what countries would be best described as gun cultured. Just as the definition of drugs culture doesn't include what criteria you should apply to countries, Kristi, so that you could best describe so you could decide which countries would be best described as drugs culture. That is not the job of the definition. The job of the definition is to just describe the phenomena. But the problem is, Kristi, people do use the term rape culture to describe whole societies, to describe whole nation states, Kristi. So we need a set of criteria, don't we? So I took a working definition and tried to set some criteria by which we could apply them. That's what I did.
In the next part of his video, he discusses perceptions of crime, not rape.
So this is part of the problem with your format, Kristi. It's so fucking sloppy. I made the video and I'm not exactly sure which part of the video. Where's the time code? Where's the reference? This is the bit of the video that I'm talking about. I'm not exactly sure whereabouts in the video that you are now. So how the hell is anybody else supposed to reasonably assess my work on the basis of what you're saying there? You talk about me looking at rape. I'm trying to guess which bit you're talking about. Rape in terms of other crimes. I do a section where I talk about rapes in terms of other crimes, because what I'm showing is that we regard rape as one of the crimes of the greatest abhorrence. Why? Because if we didn't, then that would be evidence that the attitudes towards rape had been normalized, right? So I think that's pretty important to view it in terms of other crimes. And also, if we have a situation where rape is treated a certain way, but every other crime across the board, Kristi, is treated the same way, then it's misportraying the situation slightly to say, oh, this is all about rape and this is all about sexual crimes, when it isn't, when it's something that's actually an issue relating to crime generally, not an issue relating to sexual crimes and rape. But I don't know whether those are the points that you're on about, because you don't give any reference whatsoever.
And then he starts to bring in historical data, but dismisses it. He says it's very important that what the statistical basis is for their historical incidence of rape. Well, of course, there isn't really one, because the kind of statistics we have just didn't exist. So he then says you can't do historical comparisons, which begs the question, why did you bring it up?
Why? Because I have to make mention of it, even if only to dismiss it. If I've said these are the grounds that you have available to you if you wish to describe the United Kingdom as rape cultured, right, then I've got to go through them all. Even if one of them doesn't provide you with enough evidence to make that claim, I've still got to go through it and say, well, look, the statistics in the past just don't exist, so you do not have the basis to make that claim. And then you say, oh, well, why did you mention it? Well, I have to mention it because it's one of the alternatives that I posited earlier on in the video.
And then he moves on to a case study, which he selects the United States as his case study. Why? He doesn't say.
Are you sure you really watched my video twice through, Kristi? So why did I use the United States for my case study? Possibly because the United States is one of the two countries that my video was specifically about. I did say, are societies such as the United States of America and the United Kingdom reasonably defined as rape cultures?
Then he uses statistics from the years 1974 to 2003. Why those years? He doesn't say.
So why did I choose to use those years? Well, I did actually say that as well. I did say it's because those are the statistics that I could find. Where I could find a statistical case was in terms of the United States over a much shorter term. I'm going to show you the statistics for the United States. These are the Bureau of Justice statistics for rates per thousand head of the population between 1973 and 2003. Now, I am prepared to take some criticism here right now. It wouldn't be fair for you to say, well, why didn't you pick the years 1482 to 1523, right? But it's a fair criticism to say, why does your chart stop at 2003? Are you trying to hide something, you know? I'll let you into a little secret here, Kristi, right? And I accept this makes my video not of academic standard, but I don't have the time. I couldn't spend 8 months on this fucking video, right? I don't have the time to prepare this as if it was the end product of my undergraduate years or a PhD or something like that. I chose 1973 to 2003 because there was a ready-made graphic with those years. Yes, by rights, I should have took those years up to as most recent as the data provided and to have created my own graph, but that involved several hours more work to have done that, and I couldn't afford that extra little bit of time. I concede that bit could have been done better, but if you do go and check out those statistics, there's no reversal to that trend there. I'm not hiding anything with the years that I did select there.
So he uses a lot of these statistics and reports them, but then undermines them, saying again that the way that statistics are recorded in contemporary society are more of a function of the way in which those crimes are reported within the society than anything which gives you anything meaningful about the society itself. So I'm not quite sure why we just went through all those statistics.
I agree with you, Kristi. On this one, I absolutely concede the point. I did two things. I spent some time analysing the statistics and then dismissed the statistics with I gave the examples of Sweden and India as to why we should have no faith in these statistics. I shouldn't have bothered with any of the analysis. That was ridiculous. I should have gone straight to my dismissal of the statistics. But I did need that because I needed to point out that if you're basing your claim that it's the United Kingdom and the United States are best described as rape cultured based on these statistics, then you're on pretty dodgy grounds. I should have done that and left it at that.
Then he makes the argument that because rape levels are normal as opposed to being particularly high in other places, then by implication there's no rape culture.
Yeah, that's right, Kristi, because unless I say the United Kingdom is a drugs culture, then I'm denying the existence of any drugs culture whatsoever within the United Kingdom. Unless I say the United Kingdom is crime cultured, then I'm denying the existence of any crime or any crime culture in anywhere, in any locations, any cities, any inner city districts within the United Kingdom whatsoever. That's a load of fucking hogwash. That is a total misportrayal of what I'm saying. It's a straw man of the arguments that I actually did make, and a fucking plague on your houses, Kristi, with regard to this principle of charity that you always claim to be upholding. Where's your principle of charity where you're assessing my material and then coming up with absolute shite like that?
And then he talks about survey results without citing what study that he was using.
Then Kristi Winters cites me citing some survey results without giving any indication what those survey results are that she's talking about or where they occurred in my video. So not only can the viewer of the hangout not differentiate which one she's on about and fact check to see if she's accurate or not, but I can't do it either. As far as I know, every single survey result that it was in there, I had a table of something like 70 references, I think it was, for this video. It was so big I couldn't fit it in the footnotes of the video, so I had to put a link to a separate blogspot page with all of those references. I'm assuming that Kristi has gone through those references, so if she can tell me which surveys are not listed amongst all those references with a time code on the video, which I did as far as I'm aware with every single reference there, then she can come back at me, but until she does, I'm just disregarding that claim.
And he goes into a discussion of sex in the media, Anita Sarkeesian video games, and comes to the conclusion that we don't live in a rape culture.
Oh my God, because Anita Sarkeesian just seems to pop up in every video. It's like, oh gosh.
So
it all comes back to Anita.
Everything comes back to Anita, yeah. Yeah. So
But yeah,
Foxy, do you
you
want to?
see that attitude, when it comes to feminism and people,
Yep.
treating it as if it's a monolith, and that Anita is the representative of all feminists ever, or feminists on Tumblr are representative of all feminists around the world, period. So it's just,
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm constantly being
generalizations
asked.
are okay. It's okay when they do it, but when we actually use generalization in the correct way to facilitate a conversation, then it's bad.
Okay, so that was a bit of a longer chunk there, and I wanted to show you that because this is indicative of a lot of things that I'm talking about, of things being conflated, right? It didn't matter how I used Anita Sarkeesian. Now we're on about the fact that Anita Sarkeesian is being used as this kind of universal example of a feminist, and whatever Anita Sarkeesian said is representative of all feminists. Oh, and of course, all these kinds of people, they can't resist including Anita Sarkeesian in their terrible videos, can they? None of that is relevant to critiquing my video, right? This is supposed to be an assessment of my arguments. It wouldn't matter if 10,000 people had discussed Anita Sarkeesian, just the same as it doesn't matter that 100,000 people have critiqued fucking William Shakespeare. That doesn't make an argument right or wrong, and it wouldn't matter if I was the first person to mention Anita Sarkeesian. Now, what I want to do is I want to play you the clip where I actually mentioned Anita Sarkeesian. If you haven't seen this before, see how actually what I said fits in with what your preconceptions will be, having listened to what they've said. The sexy violence is not the sexual violence. In fact, here is Anita Sarkeesian ably making the same point.
Plot devices that capitalize on female trauma for shock value function in much the same way as the hitting a child or kicking the dog tropes do. It's a lazy shorthand for evil, meant to further motivate the protagonist to take the villain down and help justify the excessive violence committed by the player in these games.
So I think that's something of a first with me using Anita Sarkeesian to highlight a point, but thank you for that, Anita. So no mention of feminism, no holding up Anita's arguments as representative of feminists in general, and my argument wasn't even a criticism of Anita Sarkeesian. I was using Anita Sarkeesian because this is one of the points that I absolutely agree with Anita Sarkeesian on. Now, did you get any of that from what they were saying in the Hangout? Is that what you would have took if you'd heard them speaking in the Hangout and hadn't seen the footage from my video? And that is just typical of the kind of conflationary, misdirecting bullshit that most of the rest of this video, actually this Hangout video, consisted from. And probably you can tell why I'm a little bit annoyed about that. So that's the context that I actually used Anita Sarkeesian in there, because it was very, very relevant. And one of the things, while I'm on the subject of that part of my video, because, and it's well worth watching, I think, just as a little segment, this little case study I made on Grand Theft Auto 5, since the Hangout's been made, Kristi Winters has called me out a couple of times for doing a case study of one. You know, as if how on earth can you only do one? How on earth can you only have one example there? I centered on Grand Theft Auto 5. The same reason that people such as you can center on the Steubenville case, right, and make that a fucking case study as one. Because it's not that you're saying, oh, this has happened once. It's the reaction to it, right? It's not the fact that that happened, but it's all the other little bits that you can pick apart. Now, why Grand Theft Auto 5 is okay as a case study of one is because that is a video, and I showed you it in my clip, that has been called out as an example of rape culture. Cultural critics, right, have called that as an example of rape culture. So that's why it was an example, not just to have a look at the content that was in it, but to juxtapose the content that's actually within the game and the way that that game handles rape versus non-sexual violence with the comments that have actually been made about it.
On the rape culture issue, I think it's a little different, because I think one of those definitions is attitudes towards rape in society, and that's the part where the anti-feminists hone in like a laser, you know. So Noel Plum spends a lot of his time talking about attitudes because that's the part that they feel is the weakest that they can go after, because then they can just paint people as prudes, you know, and they can just say you want to that stuff about video games and everything. So they kind of ignore a lot of the shit about actual rape, and they just focus on like, you want to take away Pulp Fiction or some shit like that, or like, hey, let's bring up Anita Sarkeesian for the millionth time.
So much wrong with this, I just don't know where to. I almost bring tears to my eyes. This first is this terrible conflation. Now it's just all anti-feminists, and there's no differentiation at all between all these anti-feminists and Noel Plum, let alone the video that was actually under discussion there. So that's it. I'm an anti-feminist now. Didn't know that, but apparently I'm just bundled in there. And then apparently his problem now is, these anti-feminists, they make it all about attitudes, don't they? A minute ago, the problem was it was all about statistics. It's not Kristi scoffing about it being about statistics, but apparently if we make it about attitudes, then attitudes are a problem as well.
That's a little bit like saying, you can look at gun culture in the United States by looking at how many weapons were purchased. Just because you have access to a statistic, that doesn't tell you anything about the culture.
Noel Plum spends a lot of his time talking about attitudes because that's the part that they feel is the weakest that they can go after. So they kind of ignore a lot of the shit about actual rape.
And in terms of this being an anti-feminist thing, right, I draw your attention to the oft-quoted Rain report, right? Now, the people that are promoting the idea that our societies are well described as rape-cultured will often quote from the following passage and say, in the last few years there has been an unfortunate trend towards blaming rape culture for the extensive problems of sexual violence on campus. While it is helpful to point out that systemic barriers to addressing the problem, it is important to not lose sight of a simple fact. Rape is caused not by cultural factors but by the conscious decisions of a small percentage of the community to commit a violent crime. And they'll point to that and say, yes, well, Rain might not be accepting rape culture for this, as responsible for this, but they're not denying the fact that rape culture exists or that our society is well described as rape cultured, but they never take account of what is said 2 paragraphs down, which is by the time they reach college, most students have been exposed to 18 years of prevention messages in one form or another. Thanks to repeated messages from parents, religious leaders, teachers, coaches, the media, and yes, the culture at large. The overwhelming majority of these young adults have learnt right from wrong and enter college knowing that rape falls squarely in the latter category. Now, I assume you do not regard Rain as a whole fucking bunch of anti-feminists, and yet clearly taking that paragraph on board, they do not regard our society in terms of attitude as best described as a rape culture. In fact, they're saying the exact opposite, that society at large is promoting these attitudes that are the exact opposite of the kind of attitudes that we would expect if rape had been normalized.
One of the things that really stood out about Noel Plum's video is that the conclusion was in the title. So it was like, does rape culture exist? No. And I was like, who makes a video like that? Like, is global warming a real issue? No. I don't know, like, you could make it about anything, you know. Is something happening? No, it isn't. And I'm just going to explain why it isn't happening. And you're like, okay, well, you can possibly be biased. But
So I've already discussed this with Tim, and I think we've sort of understand each other a little bit better on this one now. But I've got to include it here as well, which is that kind of the title is just about the last thing I do, right? So it's not like I set the title and then make the video and think, oh shit, I've got to make a video that fits this title. I make the video, then do the title at the very last minute after the video has been uploaded, right? Never mind after it's been scoped out and I've done a basic outline of everything and know what I'm going to say, right? I've already reached my conclusion by the time I put the title. So he may regard me as biased, and that's absolutely fine, but you can't evidence my bias by the fact that I knew what the conclusion to the video was by the time I was setting the title. That's just one of the most petty objections that I've ever seen. Of course the other two just jumped on him straight away and put him safe. Did they fuck? They just nodded their heads like a couple of fucking nodding dogs in the back of an estate car.
Okay, well, if the answer is no, like, watch that movie, The Hunting Grounds, and then go tell one of those victims of a rape on a campus that rape culture doesn't exist, and I don't think they're going to be very happy with you.
You know, it strikes me in many ways, having watched all of this, that this whole hangout is structured very much like the solar system. You know, if you go from the sun to Neptune, you're only about 1,000th of the way to the edge of what is technically the edge of the solar system. But all the decent shit really is kind of accumulated in the inner solar system there. And this hangout is very similar. We're 34 minutes in of a 100-minute hangout, and already we're out there in this sort of the Oort cloud there. Nearly all the arguments were made in the part where they shouldn't have been made, which was when Kristi outlined my video, the argument that I'd made in the video, and now we're into the sort of outer reaches way past Neptune. And the particular issue I have with this, yeah, again, we've got the same conflation. I'm saying the United States is not best described as a rape culture, and he's saying, well, that means that you're saying that rape culture doesn't exist within the United States. The bit that really grinds my gears with this is only about 7 or 10 days ago, Tim had made his own video on rape culture, and he said that you should not describe the United States as a rape culture, because he says that is misusing the concept, it's misapplying the concept, it's not a concept that's meant to be applied to societies. So he arrived at exactly the same conclusion, albeit from a slightly different bit of reasoning there, but the same conclusion.
To say we live in a rape culture is meaningless. It doesn't really describe any differentiation between what a society is supposed to be and what a rape culture is, or the difference between a rape culture and just a regular culture. It sort of just smushes it all together, and I don't think it's very useful.
Of course he never mentions this anywhere in the hangout, as if that isn't relevant, right? That he discussed the same issues and reached the same conclusion, but never mentions it in this hangout. So perhaps he should do the same thing, right? Maybe he should speak to these people, because if saying that the United States is not best described as a rape culture means you're saying rape culture does not exist, then maybe he should go and tell these people that rape culture doesn't exist.
Yeah, exactly.
or watch The Invisible War, and then find one of those rape survivors in the military and go tell her that, you know, that rape in the military isn't prevalent. There is no rape culture in the military. And I hope she knocks your block off, honestly.
Yeah, like, oh, maybe you should have been more careful. Maybe you shouldn't have brought it on yourself somehow due to some other behavior you were displaying.
You know, seriously, I actually genuinely have no problem with the idea of Foxy Jasmine getting a bit of enjoyment from the idea of somebody physically assaulting me, punching me in the face. That's absolutely fine. If that's what gets her off, then that's brilliant. But I do kind of object to her getting that pleasure on the grounds of something that I've never actually said. Where have I ever said that rape is not prevalent in the military? Where have I said that nothing exists within the military or the culture of the military which could be described within the definitions that we've given as rape culture? Where have I said any of those things?
It could have actually, you know, used the definitions, and if he wanted to critique the definitions, that's fine, but he should have critiqued them with that sort of principle of charity, as in assume the strongest argument on behalf of people like us who are talking about what actually constitutes rape culture.
How mind-blowingly hypocritical. I don't know if she's in some kind of intellectual Faraday cage here. So the principle of charity is to suffuse and perfuse throughout the universe, but Kristi is kind of protected from it. It doesn't really apply to what she does. So she can take that statement where she was supposed to be reporting on what I had to say and misreported it in so many different ways, and then continue to do so throughout the hangout. But then she quotes the principle of charity to me. I just kind of blown away by that.
But I think, I've had people talk to me like, is there a murder culture? Is there a theft culture? Is there a blah blah culture? Is there a this culture? And I would say to all of those, yes, there is. I think there's a murder culture.
Yeah.
There's a death culture. I think all of these cultures do actually exist. I just think feminism focused on rape because they saw that as a big problem. But logically, you could say that, yeah, there's a theft culture and there's a murder culture. I don't see why there wouldn't be.
And I don't disagree with anything that Tim says there. And the inclusion in this video makes it seem as if, well, I must disagree with what he says there. I mean, we tend not to talk about theft culture, we talk about crime culture, which is a culture that surrounds crime, and in terms of that crime culture, normalizes crime and leads to a greater prevalence of crime. And I don't think anybody would dispute that a crime culture exists, right? And that is something that we can study and that we can label. But I think that the way that we study and label crime culture is the way that we should study and label rape culture, which is the way that a lot of academics study and label rape culture. But the problem is there are also people who start talking about the USA being a rape culture or the United Kingdom being rape cultured, which is a very different context. And this is a point I've made again and again and again and again and again. And even when I made this point in the comments on Demotivator Opinions Mirror, with regard to crime culture, and I'll show you the comments here, which is I said I accept that the UK, there is crime culture within the UK, of course there is, but that is not the same as saying that the UK is a crime culture. That the UK is crime cultured, Kristi Winters still couldn't get the difference between those two things. She still insisted on misreporting what I had to say, and so that becomes really, really frustrating at that point. And I have to add to that, my frustrations of that aside, is Kristi Winters adopting the principle of charity there? Is she giving the most charitable and most reasonable explanation of what I'm trying to say when she interprets what I had to say in that comment in the way that she did?
Yeah, it really was, at the end of the day, I think it could have been 15 minutes long. It could have, if he wanted to make the points, he should have just, built up all his case based on the evidence and forget the pit bull thing and forget all that other stuff and just, make your case, because the other part of the problem that is all the amounts of irrelevant information that he threw in over the course of it that really didn't have anything to do with the critique that he was trying to make.
So I've missed quite a lot of bits out, and that is the last clip that I'm going to show. Missed so much out because really it was at the point where they were just going over the same ground, or more often than that, talking about things that just spiraled further and further and further away from my video, criticising just about every argument they've ever objected to, but never differentiating the arguments that they were critiquing from what I'd actually said. So it was as if it was all just being, just throw as much mud onto this as you want, and nobody's really going to know which of it relates to Noel Plum's video and which of it doesn't. But I wanted to point this bit out because I just couldn't believe where she says that my video only needed to be 15 minutes long. How on earth could it have spiraled to 40 minutes? That was way longer than it needed to be, when this video she is making now is supposed to be an academic level critique of my video, is 1 hour and 40 minutes long. And she's saying my Pitbull story was like, that could have been cut out because it wasn't relevant enough. And if you didn't watch that, the point of that was to show something that happened in the United Kingdom with the media, where the media made it seem as if all of a sudden these pit bulls were biting people every day. Of course it wasn't, right? What had changed was that the media had decided to start reporting on something that they'd never been interested in the past. And so that was the point that I was making. Don't be fooled by how much the media reports on something as if that's a fair reflection of how much it's happening. It could be happening a lot more when they're not reporting on it. It could be happening less than they make it appear because they're just jumping on everything. That was the point that I was making. And yet she makes an hour and 40 long minute video. She's already an hour and 20 minutes in when she's made this point, and yet she doesn't have the self-awareness to think this is supposed to be an academic level assessment that I've promised here, to peer review standards, to the standards that you'd apply to a thesis or a dissertation. I'm an academic and I've claimed that I've spent weeks prepping for this, and we're an hour and 20 minutes in and we've gone spiraled off topic so many times, and I'm accusing him of not sticking sufficiently well to the topic. So I just kind of blew me away a little bit there. That kind of ends the critique that I have of that. What I said is that I didn't want to make an assessment on that, and what I wanted to do is for you, good viewer, to make an assessment and to let me know what you thought. So there was 5 criteria I asked. The first was, did the hangout accurately represent my video? And of course I want you to go on what I've said in this video, but also if you could watch the first 30 minutes of that hangout, if you could watch the first 15 or 20 minutes, let's say, least of my video, that would be even better. Did the hangout accurately represent my argument? Were the criticisms valid? Were the criticisms evidenced? And then finally, if you're an academic and you're involved in assessing people in this way, were you to assess and validate the process that took place in the hangout? Would you regard it as meeting the standards expected in academia? So those were the questions that I'd be interested. I'd also be interested, of course, to know whether you feel that I have addressed the criticisms that Kristi levelled at me within that hangout. Well, this has been a bit of a long slog. If you've got this far, thank you very, very much for watching it all the way to the end, and bye for now.